Welcome to Chapter 20, AP U.S. Government and Politics, with Matt, Chandler, Will, Casey, Sam, Lawson, Bryn, and Patrick.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll start off American foreign policy and foreign policy making choices about relations with the rest of the world. And instruments of foreign policy are military, diplomatic, and economic. And military is the oldest, and it's still used today, and it's used to limit wars, things like that. Diplomatic is the quietest, and this is to keep peace and everything, and this is negotiations and summits. And then economic, becoming more powerful. This is like an increase in trade regulations, tariffs, and monetary policies. So the American foreign policy, the international organizations, the main one is the United Nations, created in 1945, and it is an organization whose members agree to renounce war and respect certain human and economic freedoms. And then regional organizations include NATO and the European Union. NATO was created in 1949 and is combined of military forces of the United States, Canada, and most of Western Europe and Turkey. The European Union is a transnational government composed of Western European countries that coordinates economic policies. The multinational corporations are companies that are sometimes more powerful than the governments under which they operate. And then there are also non-governmental organizations. To continue on American foreign policy, the policymakers themselves is the president and then the diplomats, which includes the Secretary of State, who is traditionally the key advisor to the president on his foreign policy and foreign policy matters. And then there's other personal members, and some recent presidents have established more personal systems for receiving foreign policy advice. And then lastly, we have Congress. Just the policymakers continued. This has national security establishments, and this includes the Secretary of Defense, which is the President's main civilian advisor on national defense matters. Also have the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which are the commanding officers of each of the services, and plus a chair, and constitute the Joint Chief of Staff. And then the NSC is formed to coordinate foreign and military policies. And then lastly, we have the CIA coordinates of America, who gather information and intelligence of activities abroad. So a overview of American foreign policy is a term called isolationism, which is the foreign policy course followed throughout most of American history. And to go over that a little bit, the Cold War, where we expressed our opinions on anti-communism, and we established the containment doctrine, which means the foreign policy strategy that called for the United States to isolate the Soviet Union. And it's basically to limit communism and its advances throughout the rest of the world. And then next we have McCarthyism, which is the fear prevalent in the 1950s that international communism was conspiratorial and that it would spread around the world. So to continue on the overview with the Cold War, the swelling of the Pentagon and the arms race, which was the competition between the United States and the USSR, that led to increased procurement of military weapons. And then next we had the Vietnam War and the era of detonity. And the term detonity represents a slow transformation from conflict thinking to cooperative thinking and foreign policy strategy. Next we also have SALT, which is one major initiative emerging from Dente was the strategic arms limitation talks. Next we have the Reagan rearmament, and this was a defense budget that had been declining since the mid-1950s. And then Reagan added some $32 billion to the defense budget in his first term in office to oppose the Soviet Union. And Later, we established the Strategic Defense Initiative, which used computers and other equipment to defend against the Soviet missiles from space. And then finally, George Bush proposed to move beyond containment and to integrate the Soviet Union into the community of nations. And then East and West Germany also united. So the politics of defense policy, the personnel, about 1.3 million are actively serving as reserve troops, and more reliance on National Guard and reserve troops have gone down due to cuts in defense spending. And weapons, reliance on nuclear triad is expensive, about 5.5 trillion. And treaties have been signed to reduce nuclear missiles all across the world. And then lastly, with weapons, high-tech non-nuclear weapons are becoming more prevalent now. And then the last topic is spending, which takes up about 1/5 of the federal budget. And conservatives argue against budget cuts that would leave military unprepared, while liberals argue for budget cuts to provide more money for programs. So the new global agenda, there's a decreasing role of government, and this is not only in America, but all across the world. And the military is no longer the primary instrument in foreign policy. Like it used to be, whoever ran the world had the strongest military, and it's losing its utility to resolve many international problems, and that there's not one true dominant power everywhere that can just overrule everything. And economic sanctions are becoming more prevalent because now there are non-military penalties imposed on foreign countries as an attempt to modify countries' behaviors. And then next we have nuclear proliferation, and policymakers are most concerned about countries that are actively developing nuclear weapons, which both of these include North Korea and Iran. Our next section is the new global agenda, and this mainly focuses on terrorism, which is a plan for defense against missiles through a global umbrella in space. The international economy, which is the Bush administration national security doctrine, moved toward a policy that supported preemptive strikes against terrorist and hostile states, and this was mainly established because of 9/11. And then the term interdependency is a mutual dependency in which the actions of a nation's reverberate and affect one another's economic lifelines. And international trade holds tariffs, which is a tax on imported goods to raise the price, thereby protecting American businesses and workers. And then lastly, we have NAFTA and GATT, which are ways to lower tariffs and increase trade. So continuing with the new global agenda, the international economy, we've tried to establish a balance of trade, which is a equal ratio, what is paid for imports to what is earned for exports. And year after year, the American balance of trade has been negative. And so the global connection with foreign aid, so foreign aid is used to stabilize nations friendly to the United States, and this is the United States will send help to other nations to help develop them economically and to produce more money in those countries. And then so the global connection with energy is that America depends on imported oil, about 60%, but not as much as other countries like Japan, and we're going to be getting a lot of this oil and fossil fuels over near the Middle East. And organizations of petroleum exporting countries, or OPEC, controls the price of oil and amount its members produce and sell to other nations. So this makes it so that one nation cannot control all of the oil sales and therefore highly escalate all of the prices. So lastly, understanding foreign and defense policy are national security policy making and democracy. So this contains that Americans are more interested in domestic than foreign policy, and separation of powers is very important because this allows not just because if it was only one power controlling everything, they may focus more on foreign or domestic. And then lastly, we have the national security policy and the scope of government. And the scope of government is definitely very large because foreign policy is such an influential piece all across America because of how much it affects not only our country but the rest of the world.